I had this really traumatic birth experience for my first daughter, and I needed to rewrite that. And every time I went to visualize it, I had this blockage. I couldn't see the birth. I could see going in the car. I could visualize getting into labor and things like that, but I couldn't see the actual birth. And so I knew that there was like a deep fear there that I needed to get through. And so a tool that I would have people work through and have used now with my athletes or people that I'm coaching, even at an executive level, is if you can't see the event, there's a few ways to get through that. One is actually we learn by modeling. If you think about a little kid, how it learns to walk, he watches you as its parent or its caregiver. And so you can use the same thing for achieving something you've never done before. So I actually watched. For me, I really wanted to have a natural unmedicated birth. And so I went on YouTube to try to see it. Okay, like how do I watch someone else achieve the skill that I want? And this is applicable anywhere, right? Like if you want to be really good at public speaking or you have a big presentation coming up, YouTube is an amazing resource to go and watch people do the thing or the skill that you're trying to do. The second piece that I did was journaling. And so I wrote the script of exactly what I wanted to have happen. From every little detail, the feelings, the sound, the emotion, like what was going to happen if this person told me a trigger for me, which was, oh, we're going to have to go to C-section, right? Like what was going to happen in my mind and how did I prepare myself for that moment? So the first is modeling, watching people do what skill you want to do. The second is writing the script of exactly what you want to have happen. And so you can detail that out. The third is involving a support system. So while it was me giving birth, my partner was so important in that and making sure that he was aware of the things that I was doing and wanted to achieve. And so again, that could be someone on your team, that could be your partner, that could be whoever it is. But those three things are really important for me from a visualization perspective.
Welcome to Limitless Minds, the podcast where curiosity meets greatness. Each week, co-hosts DJ Eitzen and Harry Wilson sit down with some of the most exceptional individuals across sports, business, and beyond. From world-class athletes and peak performance coaches to visionary CEOs, entrepreneurs, and influential authors, they dive deep into the stories and strategies that drive extraordinary success. If you're ready to discover what it takes to be truly limitless and push beyond your own limits, you're in the right place.
Today's guest is Katelyn Good, a former world-class figure skater who competed at 4 World Championships and earned national titles in both Canada and Denmark. After an injury ended her skating career, Katelyn reinvented herself, excelling as a marketing leader and mental performance coach. She's built and scaled marketing teams, launched flagship products for major companies, and helped businesses achieve transformative growth. Now, she teaches mental performance skills to ambitious athletes and professionals, empowering them to conquer self-doubt and achieve their best. Enjoy. So we have Kate Good today on the Limitless Minds podcast. This is gonna be a great episode because we have somebody who has been known as elite in a number of spaces, but certainly national titles in Canada and Denmark, before World Championship appearances, also in the marketing and business space. She transitioned into marketing and she's also elite in the mental fitness, mental performance coaching space. And so we have somebody that's as kind of a Renaissance woman, can do it all. And
really good. She's really good.
Yeah. You think she's heard that before? Probably. Ouch. No, but I think
joke,
that's your dad joke. And you're worthy of the dad jokes, man. It's cool. Man. You know what I mean? But I think that, like, given your background and some of what we know that we want to share with our audience, I think you're going to be really capable of tackling kind of topics on resilience, identity as it comes from sports to business and kind of that transition. Certainly, what it takes to achieve peak performance in sports and business. And so I think that we're just really eager to learn more about you, share more with folks that have been, kind of in our ecosystem for some time, and just dive in. But, first of all, what I really want to kind of share with folks is your background, right? I mean, I mentioned you're a world-class, world champion figure skater from your past, and you carry that with you. Tell us a little bit about that journey, how you got into that, and that journey from starting it young to international, national success.
Sure. Well, thank you both so much for having me. And usually people say, are you bad? So most
See,
people,
my
the
joke
good
was- my
remark, I'm
joke
like,
was
thank
good,
you.
man. That's
Yeah,
right.
you'd be surprised all the things that I have gotten over the years. So,
Mhm.
but again, thanks both for having me so much. I appreciate you both so much and what you're doing. But to answer your question, Harry, where did it all begin? So I started skating when I was 3 years old, and my parents, I'm really fortunate to have just an amazing support system and family background, and they put us kind of in everything. I did skating, swimming, badminton, volleyball, baseball, you name it, we tried it. But I put on a pretty dress and won my first medal, and I was hooked. Like that
Yeah.
was the moment for me. But I was never the athlete that you'd look at and be like, oh, that girl, she's going to make it. I was like, good luck, sweetie. You're
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
great. Here's your participation medal. But I had a lot of heart and a lot of will. And I truly just loved skating more than anything. I don't even think, except maybe my partner and my children now, have ever found that like deep love for something that you do. And I think that was really what carried me through. And I just had this immense determination to prove to myself that I was capable of something great. And I think that's what carried me through. And so I really got my career started to take off much later than most skaters. I was probably 15, 16 when I really started believing in myself and knowing that I was maybe capable of something more than I thought. And that is really where my career took off. So I started actually in synchronized skating and reached the world level in that sport and realized that as I stood on the podium with the silver medal and saw Les Suprêmes in bright lights, I was like, I want my name up there. This is not enough for me. And so I actually had to make a really big shift of discipline and knew that synchronized skating was never going to be an Olympic sport. So if my ultimate goal was to be an Olympian, I had to make a really strong behavior change and relearn a different discipline, which was ice dance. And so I went through several months and almost like, I guess, a year of learning this new discipline and deciding, and then going to find a partner, which is a whole other conversation. And ultimately found someone named Nick, and he was living in the US. So at 18 years old, I packed up. I found this partner 2 weeks later. I said, okay, I'm going to pack up my whole life, move by myself down to the US to train for this dream. And that's really where we found some crazy fast international success. And we're the first team in the history of the country of Denmark, because I skated for Denmark at that time, to ever make it to World Championships and ever qualify for the Olympics. And that was kind of where it all started.
It's
Wow.
amazing.
So how Denmark, how did that connection get made?
So he was Danish, and at the world level, you only need one of two partners to have citizenship to compete. Okay. So we decided to compete for Denmark at that time, just based on the deal the federation gave us.
Okay. And how did you get hooked up with him?
There's literally a website that's called icepartnersearch.com. And
Wow.
it's like a dating profile where you have to
swipe left, swipe right.
It wasn't that advanced, but you had like your height, your weight, your qualities, videos, pictures. Like it was literally a profile where you could find someone that matched your identity. And because there were so few men, like the girls, you go all across the country trying to find a partner. I think I was his 21st tryout.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dang.
And then
It's like The Bachelor. It's like The Bachelor. You know?
literally like a lineup. Yeah. But I remember that morning so clearly though. Like I had driven down to Connecticut. I was getting my like ready in the hotel, and I was like, this is it, Kate. Like you need to rise to this occasion, because there are so few. I'm 5'5" and I'm tall in ice dance. And so there are only so many men that would work from a height perspective with me. And I just remember so pivotally in that moment, like, okay, this is it. And I had so much self-talk in that time, and I have no idea actually where this came from. But it was really about controlling my language in my mind and being so present in that moment that this was it, and focusing on really what I brought to the table. And I was always known for my like emotion and being able to draw the crowd in. And I was like, if I focus on this and draw him into me in that way, then I think this will work. And so that's what I just kept repeating to myself in those moments as I put on my skates, and visualizing what it would look like to skate with him, because I'd seen videos of him before. And so I used that as a tool in my toolbox to get me ready for that moment, which actually, even to this day, is probably one of the most pivotal moments of my career, because without him, none of this would have
Yeah.
happened after. So
Yeah.
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 Man.
Well, you mentioned, you already mentioned a couple little buzzwords that I'm eager to dive into, because
Sure.
obviously talking about mindset, I'm going to get right into mindset, right?
Do it. Yeah.
And you already talked about self-talk, and you talked about visualization. Like, this is good stuff. And actually, if anybody follows Kate on LinkedIn, I don't know if this may be on other platforms too, you're doing some like guided visualization stuff
Yeah.
on LinkedIn. And maybe, I don't know if you're doing it on Instagram. Are you doing it on other platforms too, or just LinkedIn?
Instagram, but mostly LinkedIn. Yeah.
Okay. So follow Kate there. But I think it's really, really cool stuff. And so, I was curious about, the mental demands of competing, especially when you're younger, right? I mean, I have, we were just talking before this about the kids, and, DJ's got 16-6, 5 kids, 16-6. You got 3 kids, 10-1. I got 3, 12-7. And I don't know if yours are athletes, and even if they're not, if they're on other stuff where they're, on pressure scenarios, like that pressure when you're young has got to be challenging, because you don't have any roadmap, you don't have any roadmap.
Totally.
So tell me about like the mental game, especially early on, and how that evolved for you, and like what tools were kind of most present in your work,
My work. So I think you're spot on. I think even today, my work as a mental performance coach is really starting to gear towards that like 9 to 15 mark, because I'm seeing that 70% of athletes are retiring, getting out of sport age like 13, 14, because they can't handle the pressure. They don't have that confidence, or at least the tools to know how to manage their self-talk. So I think it's so critical today. And I don't think our education system does a good job of giving kids the tools through those moments. And I think most parents are not professional athletes, and while we all try our best, don't know how do you even manage the car ride home, right? Like, I don't know what to say. How do I get him out of this funk if they lose, or also if they win, right? But to go back to your question around the tools that really mattered to me as a young athlete, I went through a period in my life right before that like takeoff moment where I actually had very minimal self-belief. I had a lot of self-doubt. I really didn't believe that I could do it. And I had this, in skating, you have to pass these tests to get to the next level. And there was this pre-novice test that I just could not do. I could land all my jumps in practice. I could do everything. The moment the competition came, I just fell literally on everything. And so one of the first, I guess my first experiences in mental performance was visualization. And this actually came from my mom. She brought in this guy, I don't remember his name actually, into our house. And he sat me down and started teaching me how to visualize this jumps, because when I was thinking about my programs, I was falling in my head.
Oh.
And I think one of the things that people don't realize in visualization is like, you are the director, the producer of this very sophisticated thing called your imagination, and you can tell it what to do. And we know that our brains cannot differentiate what we think happened and what physically actually happened. The neural pathways are the same. And so in my mind, I was visualizing myself falling because that was the only outcome I knew. And what was a big unlock for me was knowing that I could create the world that I wanted in my mind. So that was one of the first ones. And I've used this now. I use this today even to get parking spots. Like, this tool is so powerful. As I said, like, the mind doesn't know the difference. And I've used it now. One of the most recent was actually in the birth of my 1-year-old. I had this really traumatic birth experience for my first daughter, and I needed to rewrite that. And every time I went to visualize it, I had this blockage. I couldn't see the birth. I could see going in the car. I could visualize getting into labor and things like that, but I couldn't see the actual birth. And so I knew that there was like a deep fear there that I needed to get through. And so a tool that I would have people work through and have used now with my athletes or people that I'm coaching, even at an executive level, is if you can't see the event, there's a few ways to get through that. One is actually, we learn by modeling. If you think about a little kid, how it learns to walk, he watches you as its parent or its caregiver. And so you can use the same thing for achieving something you've never done before. So I actually watched, for me, I really wanted to have a natural unmedicated birth. And so I went on YouTube to try to see it. Okay, like, how do I watch someone else achieve the skill that I want? And this is applicable anywhere, right? Like, if you want to be really good at public speaking, or you have a big presentation coming up, YouTube is an amazing resource to go and watch people do the thing or the skill that you're trying to do. The second piece that I did was journaling. And so I wrote the script of exactly what I wanted to have happen, from every little detail, the feelings, the sound, the emotion, like what was going to happen if this person told me a trigger for me, which was, oh, we're going to have to go to C-section, right? Like what was going to happen in my mind, and how did I prepare myself for that moment? So the first is modeling, watching people do what skill you want to do. The second is writing the script of exactly what you want to have happen, and so you can detail that out. The third is involving a support system. So while it was me giving birth, my partner was so important in that, and making sure that he was aware of the things that I was doing and wanted to achieve. And so again, that could be someone on your team, that could be your partner, that could be whoever it is. But those three things are really important for me from a visualization perspective. And the guidance I give there is visualization doesn't have to be also this very lengthy process where you sit down for an hour and try to think through this thing. It could be such a small moment. I like to do it right before I go to bed. So I just run through whatever the thing is that I'm trying to achieve in that moment. It can take less than 5 minutes. And there's so many different ways you can employ it, whether it's gaining confidence, whether it's trying to see a goal that you want to achieve, whether it's literally getting parking before you leave, right? Like you see it and you can visualize it happening. The mind is just so immensely powerful beyond our beliefs. So that was a really important one for me, and has continued to be through my life.
I like what you said about, you didn't use necessarily the word mimic, but like, watching others do it successfully, and we were talking about youth athletes a second ago. I mean, it's interesting. I really love teaching athletes it's okay to like sit in front of the TV and watch, let's say it's a baseball player, like, because I remember growing up, like, there's all these baseball players that had very unique batting stances, right? From Ken Griffey was my favorite player to like, whatever, Mark McGwire or Jeff Bagwell, like just people that, today, like Juan Soto was a guy that like a lot of youth baseball players are like copying his approach. And he has this really dramatic approach towards, like, he sees a ball and he does this kind of like, I forget what they call it, but like this Juan Soto shuffle, I think is what they call it, right?
Okay.
And now you see all these guys playing Little League Baseball, like doing this
And do a shuffle.
But I mean, I think part of it is like, it's like an impression you're trying to do, or, for singers, sometimes like you just kind of start to build your register based on really doing an impression of some of your, whoever influences you, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is a really great way to kind of set a vision for like what you want to be or look like, or how do you want to perform? Because like you said, like the stories we tell ourselves, the visualization the imagination that we create can work for you or can work against you, and
Totally.
It's interesting too, Kate, that you talk about writing things down, and it's whether you're visualizing or you're writing something down, those are two things that you're doing without technology. And I feel like that's interesting, because I spent some time doing this over Thanksgiving. Is I literally put my phone across the room and put it up on top of the entertainment stand, and then I just watched what was happening in the room with me, and 90% of the people were on their phone. they were engaged in their phone, and it's just like, and like that's almost like the exact opposite of what you're saying, where you're like, write it down, visualize, do something outside of technology if you want to get to your goals. And the studies show, I was reading something that said mental imagery can improve performance by up to 35%. And so like, it's massive, right? But yet people don't do it. So my question is to you, is there, if I try it once, right, I put my phone down, I've said, listen, I listened to the podcast, Kate Good was on there, I'm gonna try this, visualization thing. Like if it doesn't work the first time, like, do I keep trying it? Like, tell me a little bit about how I do this over an extended period of time.
Yeah, I think it's actually pretty weird for people at the beginning. I think it comes with a little bit of openness. I think you have to also be open to the fact that your mind has this power. And is it going to work the first time you do it? Maybe not, right? But I think that a practice, like anything, it becomes part of that like mindfulness piece. And you don't actually have to sit there and visualize and sit down and see it happen and run through the program, right, with your eyes closed. It could be something you're just seeing in your mind throughout the day. That comes again with practice. But for me, I would definitely give it like a good 30 days, even if you try it just once a week. And my guidance would be to use a guided visualization first. It is definitely hard if you don't have the practice to try to sit down and do it yourself. That's why I suggest doing the script, like at least start by writing it. And if you can write it, you can start to see it, right? 75% of our brain is part of the visual cortex. And this is why this works so well. But I would start with a guided visualization. You can find a lot of those on YouTube. If anyone wants like a personal one, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to write one for you, at least to get it started and record that for you. But that would be where I would say to start, is try not to do it by yourself. Try to like listen to one first, and you'll start to find what you like and what you don't like. For me, some of the ones that are too slow, too long, not like concrete enough, don't do it for me, which is why I write what I want to see. Because that's really creating the thing that I want, and no one knows your situation better than you and what you specifically want to achieve. And my guidance there is really try to, the first most pivotal moment is what it feels like when you achieve that. So an example, let's say that you're trying to earn $500,000 a year, right? Like that's your goal this year. The crux of that visualization is the moment you see that. What does it feel like when you see it on is it a bank statement? Is it you're opening an envelope? Who are you telling in that moment? Who's the first person you call? What does it feel like when you see that exact dollar amount, right? Like and it's that specific moment that you want to focus on, at least to get started. And then you can kind of build up to what that feels like, the things that you did before that, what's happening in the background, what has changed in your world. How do you stand a little different now, right? Like how do you interact a little bit differently with your world and the people around you?
What kind of scarves and
Literally.
turtlenecks?
Yeah.
This man's like he's like, I am not getting cold today. What I like about that, Kate, and because I was, because obviously I've been studying this a little bit, and I think, I don't know if it was Mel Robbins or somebody like that, that I was listening to, and she was walking through like a guided visualization, and she hit me because like, when I think visualization, I think visual, right? When I'm seeing, right? Which I think obviously is a big part of it, but it's not just, that's just one sensory aspect, right? So let's just say whether, let's just say it's like a big board meeting, whatever, right? Like it's kind of like not only seeing the room, of course, or like who's in there and who's sitting there and who's going to be in what seat, but also like, what does the coffee in that room smell like when somebody brings it in? Like what is that, what is the pencil or pen in my hand feel like as I'm writing down my notes? What is it going to feel like when like I get, something approved or get the sale or whatever it is? Like, what is that going to like, what's my heart rate going to be like,
Exactly.
Like, so just really walking through the sensory aspects of, like all five senses on like what this is going to feel and look like. And I think that's what you positioned is just that, you know what I mean? It's kind of all of the ecosystem around what that, you mentioned that the example of, hey, I want to make $500,000 this year. I love that. Who am I going to tell? Who am I going to celebrate with? Right. What's going to be my plans, based on some of the goals that I have is like, on all that stuff. So I think that's fantastic.
And DJ, to go back to your point around timing, so there was a study done out of the University of Chicago where they had these basketball players. They divided them into 3 groups. The first one did physical free throws. The second, I'm clearly not a basketball player.
No, we got you.
Like the worst at basketball. The second, they did just visualizing the free throws in their minds, and the third, they practiced nothing. And it took them 8 weeks, and the group who actually physically did it improved by 24%. That's like an 8-week period. So if you commit to doing this once a day for 8 weeks, for me, that would be a really good test to seeing if you have that, and focusing again on that one thing that you want to improve.
Yeah, and I like what you said too. Like a lot of this, and that's why I asked the question, because I think some of these things can be intimidating. And so you talked about, find a guided visualization. For me, that's super helpful, because like I think sometimes when it comes to some of these things, I won't do them or make them part of a daily habit because they are intimidating or I don't know how. And so the guided piece is really helpful. And then you also talk about kind of small bite-sized chunks. You don't have to. It's not something you're doing for hours, a day. And so that those two things are really, really helpful. when as you're kind of going through your story and talking through some of these things, I think about, I kind of go backwards and who are some of the people in your life early on that made a huge imprint on you and who you are today?
That's such a beautiful question. There have been a few. The one that I will say that is not my parents or my siblings would be my mental performance coach. Her name is Stephanie Hanlon, and she was brought into my life because my mom passed away 60 days before World Championships when I was 20 years old. And so you can imagine I was this young girl who my mom was my entire belief system. She truly believed in me more than anyone. And as I mentioned before, she was really the one who gave me some of these initial mental techniques and taught me about language and taught me about all these pieces. And so losing her in a moment before my biggest World Championships was just earth shattering for me. And so Stephanie was brought into my world to teach me a lot about the mind and how to control it. And I didn't know that it was called neutral at the time. We used to call it focus on what is. And that was really one of the key components of how I got through that time, because she taught me how to, when everyone was telling me it's going to be fine, and I was like, this is the last thing that I want to hear right now. It's not fine. But what she showed me was that, can I compete? Yes. My heart is broken, but my legs, they're still strong. Those are the facts, right? And I trust my partner. I trust my training. These are things that I know how to do. And she helped me really control my language in that moment. She taught me how to control the imagery that I used. And I think this really built my confidence because she helped me really change the stories that I was telling myself. So I think when you're thinking about confidence, there's three pieces. There's, what are the past experiences? What are the stories that I've been telling myself? What am I telling myself right now? I am blank. And what do I tell myself in the future? What is the image that I'm creating of the person that I want to be and where I'm going towards? And so once you start cultivating these three components, that's when you can really drive self-confidence, because I believe that confidence is just components of the things that you've already done. So if you haven't done this thing, you can look back and say, well, I have done hard things. I have competed before under pressure. I have passed a test. I have presented an idea. You can break them down into small components that make up this bigger thing that you're trying to do. And so she really helped me get to a place where I just unlocked the power of my mind. And I remember so clearly that skate, like I could feel every edge. The music was like immersed in my body. I could feel my ribs expanding with every breath that I took through those 4 minutes. And when it ended and like our hands went up, because that was like our ending positions, I realized in that moment that I had unlocked something so much more powerful than a title, so much more powerful than winning that skate. It was the power of my mind. And I've been working with her every day. Oh, not every day, but all the way until now. She's still my performance coach. And she's helped me through so many different transitions. So I would say that I owe just so much immense gratitude to her and helping me through that very difficult time and through actually a lot of the transitions in my life.
And actually, I was going to ask you, because like you mentioned transitions, right?
So,
for all athletes, there comes a time, right? And sometimes for very few, you get to choose when you finish. You know what I mean? It's very few. You finish on top. You're holding a trophy or a medal or something like that, and you're like, you know what? I'm finished. I'm going to ride off sunset.
Good.
But for most,
nice.
I mean, for most, you don't necessarily end on your own terms. And I know that happened to you, and it happened to you with an injury. Tell us about that, and like how that story and really how it kind of forged the path moving forward.
So it was it happened originally because we skated for Denmark, we would skate and live in Denmark and Italy during the season instead of our home base in Connecticut. And we were skating at this very, very cold rink in Italy. And I was doing the split lift, which is like his feet are in it's called the spread eagle. And my legs are split across his body. essentially my hip just popped. And I ended up having 2 tears in my labrum, a tear, which is like the piece of cartilage in between your femur and your hip socket, a tear in my hip flexor. And so I had surgery in September of 2011 in Vail, Colorado. I was on the bike the next morning. They had shaved my femur, shaved my hip socket, repaired those 2 tears and the one in my hip flexor. And then they had made this small incision, like a little X in my IT band to give it more space. But there had been a miscommunication between the surgeon and the physio. And so when you have this little incision made, apparently you're supposed to take a lot longer. And so I was back on the ice 7 weeks after surgery, skating better than I had in a year. Like I was on fire. Like it was the best feeling. I was more stable, faster, stronger in all aspects. And we had originally written off that season, but because we were skating so well, we're like, well, we might as well, like this. Why not? And so it was December. And so that was just a couple months after the surgery. And this pain came back ferociously. So much so that I couldn't walk for more than 10 minutes without being in just agony. And I couldn't understand what was wrong. Like I was so angry and afraid and just not trusting my body either. I think I like really didn't trust it anymore. Of like, why is this pain back? Why is, and I got in a very negative place. I was like, why is this happening to me? Why again? Like all this, right? And so I ended up going into multiple surgeons and multiple scans, MRIs, X-rays, you name it, couldn't find anything. And so they said, look, like you need to stop skating now or don't walk when you're 30. You can make a choice. Wow. And so obviously I chose life. And in a very quick moment, sitting on the 4th floor of this business school that is downtown Montreal, I had to call my coaches. And because I actually didn't even have the courage to tell them in person at that time that this was over for me. I was in such denial that this was going to be the end that I couldn't face it. They ultimately made me come in and tell them in person. They were great that way. But that was it. And all of a sudden I went from being, I'm a figure skater to I'm a student. I think like, what is this world? And what I realized through that, and this would be something that as we were talking about kids earlier, I think one of the most dangerous sentences that I ever used with myself was, I am a figure skater, because my identity became so closely tied to my sport and the thing that I did that every time you perform, it's like you're putting your whole world on a platter to be shattered, right? And that's why you see a lot of the time where these athletes fail under the pressure when the lights went on, because it's not just the performance that is at stake, it is your being that is at stake. And so after a lot of reflection, I've learned that the language that I would advise kids and parents to use today with their kids is, I figure skate. I excel at athletics. The same applies for entrepreneurs, doctors, all of that. It's so easy to get so tied to the thing that you do versus it becoming who you are. Right. And so for me, that was one of the biggest learnings after that, that I found, is that I'm so much more than my sport. And I always was, but at that point in time. And so to answer your question, Harry, about like that transition, the first step of it is actually just acknowledging the emotional toll and knowing that like you can grieve that loss. And I did grieve that loss. I didn't go back into an ice rink for 4 years. I didn't even step foot in one, because for me, I knew that like, I just want to skate again. And I needed to redefine who I was. I think the second piece of that is really starting to rebuild that identity. And the first way to do that is to get really clear on your values. What are the things that matter to you? And a lot of those can be driven from who you were as an athlete. So for me, integrity is one of my highest values, of doing what you say you're going to do. And that applies whether I was going to do a marketing exam or whether that was going to stick to still going to the gym, even though I didn't have a goal in mind. I think one of the biggest chain flips though for me was reframing the injury. And so shifting the narrative from the like, why is this happening to me, or seeing it as an end, to seeing it as, wow, actually, how fortunate am I that I'm 21 years old and I've already had one full career that was really successful, and now I get to start another one. Like how many people get to do that? Actually, so many athletes get so caught because they are afraid, because they don't know what else they can do if they're not that they just stay too long in many regards.
Yeah.
And so for me, I actually started seeing it as, I get to like retry all these new things. Like, what else do I like? What else do I like to do? Right. Like, and using my athlete mindset of like resilience and adaptability and goal setting, and figuring out how else do I channel my competitive spirit into something else.
Mhm.
And that's actually really what led me to my career in marketing.
Yeah, I love
Man.
it. Yeah, I
Leads
mean,
us-
yeah, I mean, I think it's you know, it's a common thread that most of us experience, right? Where, you know, there's another chapter, right?
Yeah.
And many of us kind of struggle during that transition moment. Some of us never really recover in that transition moment, right? I mean, especially, I know athletes do that a lot. I mean, I have a sister that, you know, played, you know, she was an I am a basketball player type, right?
Oh wow. Yeah.
And then when it ended, like overnight, it seemed like, you know, I think she struggled with like trying to figure out, who am I if I'm not a basketball player, right? And I think it's the same thing if I'm going from one career to another, you know, like I was this is what I was. Now I guess I'm exploring something different. And so I think during COVID, we had a lot of people that were experiencing that as they didn't have a choice. Maybe they got laid off and now they're trying to find a new career. The job market's tough. Like, who am I? Now, some people were able to rediscover, you know, and reframe, like, you know, into a new journey, but really challenging for everybody. I think, Kate, this is a great opportunity to close, you know what I mean? And really, because in part two, we really want to talk a little bit about that transition into marketing, into a fantastic marketing career, into a fantastic mental performance coaching career. But I think what you gave us today was really important, right? You know, how to visualize maybe differently than people thought, right? And why it's so critical. The value of self-talk, particularly in the face of adversity, and you know, and even in the times of success, and also that ability to reframe as you reinvent yourself. You know what I mean? I think these are really great tools and things to recognize. So
Harry, real quick too, that you talk about, you know, what she said around adversity. My heart is broken, but my legs are strong. I think that was so powerful. And how that, and then you go to the injury, right? And so now, my legs are broken, right? But your values, are strong. And you wanted to go directionally was really strong. Like that's what I mean, no matter what the adversity was, you found a way to reframe it and then focus on the next right step and the next thing. And I think the listeners are going to get a lot out of that. So I appreciate you sharing.
The one thing I would add is maybe a mistake that I made in that transition. I actually hid the fact that I was an athlete. I didn't tell anyone for a very long time. And it only came about because a colleague found my Wikipedia page and was like, "You did what?" And so I think that something that, looking back, that I would have changed was, in those moments of transition, really be so compassionate with yourself that this is actually a beautiful part of you, even though it has come to an end and maybe opened a new door. Know that all that experience, and again, go back to like the cultivating those experiences and those stories for the right reason, that is still a part of you, and it always will be. And so not shying away from those other seasons of yourself, and bringing those forward, because they have immense power.
Yeah,
no question.
Awesome. Well, listen, Kate Good, part one. For those listening and watching, stay tuned for part two with Kate Good. And remember, you don't have to be sick to get better.